He handed his wife his coat and a shopping bag like she was hired help, walked into the jewelry house ahead of her, and asked the staff for their most expensive ring for the woman waiting by the counter. He wanted her to carry the bags. He wanted her to watch. What he didn't notice was that every single employee in that store went quiet the moment she walked through the door, their eyes flicking toward her again and again, like they were waiting for permission to breathe. He never once wondered why. The doors of Duarte and Ren opened with a soft mechanical hush, and the air inside smelled like polished stone and old money. Anton Reyes walked in first, chin high, his loafers clicking sharp against the marble. Behind him came Marisol, arms full of his overcoat and a garment bag he'd pushed into her hands in the parking garage without a single word of thanks. She walked 2 steps back, the way he preferred it. She always walked 2 steps back. The drive over had been silent except for his phone. He'd spent the whole ride smiling down at messages he tilted just out of her view, laughing once at something she wasn't allowed to see. When they'd parked, he'd stepped out, popped the trunk, and handed her the bags the way a man hands his luggage to a stranger paid to carry it. "Hold these," he'd said. "And don't embarrass me in there. These are serious people." Marisol had taken the bags without a word. She'd learned across 4 long years exactly how much her silence cost her, and it was always less than her voice ever did. He wasn't looking at her now. He was scanning the room for someone else. Camille was already there, posed near the front display cases, glowing under warm gallery lighting in a burgundy dress that had probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She lit up the second she spotted Anton, and didn't so much as glance at the woman trailing behind him carrying his things. To Camille, Marisol wasn't a person. She was scenery. Something you set your coat on and forgot existed. "You came," Anton said, kissing her cheek right there in the open showroom, right in front of his own wife. "Of course I came," Camille said, sliding a hand slowly across his chest. "You promised me today was finally the day." Marisol stood holding the coat pressed against her body, her face perfectly still. But something behind her eyes shifted, quiet and small, like a door easing open somewhere in a dark room nobody else could see into. Then the third person arrived. Eileen, Anton's mother, swept through the entrance wrapped in a fur she absolutely did not need in that mild weather, her perfume announcing her a full second before she did. She kissed her son on both cheeks, took Camille's hands in hers, and held them up like she was appraising a prize she'd personally selected. "Look at you," she cooed. "A woman who actually knows how to carry herself in a room like this." Then her eyes drifted, slow and deliberate, until they landed on Marisol standing near the wall. And for one brief flicker, something crossed Eileen's face. Not embarrassment. Not surprise. Something colder. A flash of calculation, gone almost before it registered, the look of someone quietly confirming that a plan was still on schedule. "You," Eileen said flatly, not even bothering to use her name. "Wait over there by the wall. We have grown business to handle, and I don't need it crowded." Marisol moved without argument, without a sigh, quiet as ever, and stood exactly where she'd been told to stand. But she'd caught that flicker crossing Eileen's face, and she filed it away carefully, the way she filed away everything that mattered. Behind the long glass counter, a young sales associate watched all of it unfold. Her name tag read Priya. She was barely 4 months into the job and didn't yet recognize every important face that walked through those doors. But she knew, with a prickling certainty she couldn't explain, that something in this room was deeply wrong. She glanced toward the woman standing quietly by the wall, then dropped her eyes back down to her tray of rings, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened pieces that didn't need straightening at all. "We're here for an engagement ring," Anton announced to the entire showroom, loud enough that 2 browsing customers turned their heads. "The very best you carry. Money isn't a concern. Bring out the serious pieces." Priya swallowed hard. "Of course, sir. Let me get the—" "No need for a manager," Anton cut her off, waving a hand like he was shooing away a fly. "Just bring the good stuff. My fiancé has expensive taste." His fiancé. The word dropped into that quiet showroom like a glass shattering against stone. Near the wall, Marisol closed her eyes for one long, slow breath. When she opened them again, they were completely dry. And somehow that dryness was worse than tears would have been. She had married this man in a small courthouse ceremony with 6 guests and a dress she'd borrowed from a cousin. Back when he had nothing but big talk and a hungry look in his eyes. She had believed in him then. She had listened to his half-formed dreams stretch late into the night, cooked meals on a budget that barely stretched, and never once told him the entire truth about who she really was. She had wanted, more than anything else in this world, to be loved for the quiet woman she was and not for what she had already built with her own 2 hands. She had wanted one single person to choose her before ever learning her worth. Now she understood exactly what a tender, foolish hope that had truly been. To understand what was about to happen in that showroom, you need to understand where Marisol came from. She was raised above a hardware store in a working-class neighborhood by a grandfather named Raphael who'd spent 40 years as a locksmith and metalworker, repairing everything from broken padlocks to jammed gate hinges for anyone in the neighborhood who couldn't afford to call a professional twice. His hands were always busy, always shaping something out of scrap other people had thrown away. On the windowsill of their small apartment sat a bent, tarnished iron ring mandrel, the metal cone locksmiths and jewelers once used to shape rings by hand, worn smooth from decades of his grip. "This built everything we ever had," he told her once, pressing it into her small palm. "It isn't much to look at, but it's ours, and nobody can take it from you. One day, Mija, you build something of your own that they can't take either. You understand me?" Marisol understood him completely. As a girl, she sketched rings and pendants on the backs of old receipts from her grandfather's shop, shapes rising up from somewhere she couldn't quite explain, designs no one had ever formally taught her. She taught herself to shape wire and solder metal in borrowed hours after the hardware store closed for the night. She sold her first handmade pieces for a few dollars a piece at a weekend flea market on the edge of town, wearing that same iron mandrel on a leather cord under her shirt, so it always stayed close to her heart. She had been soft once. In many ways she still was soft, underneath everything that came later. But softness was never the same thing as weakness. And the world standing in that showroom was about to learn the difference the hard way. Here's the part people never believe at first. How does a man live 4 years beside a woman, and never once learn she owned an entire jewelry empire? The answer is simple. Marisol made absolutely certain of it. And Anton made it disturbingly easy. Long before she ever met him, she had built her company quietly under her maiden name, Marisol Duarte, through a private holding structure that kept her personal name off every public document tied to the business. She'd done it deliberately, having watched too many people around her get treated entirely differently the moment others learned what they were worth. She wanted, just once in her life, a love that had nothing to do with money. So when Anton asked what she did for a living early in their courtship, she gave him a small, boring lie. She told him she handled inventory logistics for a distribution company downtown. Paperwork. Spreadsheets. Nothing worth asking twice about. And Anton, being exactly who he was, never asked twice. He never really asked once. A man who respects his partner stays curious about her days. A man who has already quietly decided she's beneath him simply doesn't bother. Her cover story wasn't even a particularly good one. It didn't need to be. His own arrogance sealed that lie shut tighter than any legal contract ever could have. He hadn't missed the truth by accident. He'd missed it because he never once considered her worth looking at closely enough to notice. For 4 years, he told himself a comfortable story, and the story went like this. Marisol was nothing without him. She leaned on him for everything that mattered. Without him, she'd have ended up right back where she started, with nothing at all. It is remarkably easy to betray a woman once you've already convinced yourself she's small. The late nights that were never actually about work. The business trips that were really trips with Camille. The phone he kept face down at every dinner, full of another woman's name saved under something harmless. And through every bit of it, his mother had been right there beside him, leaning in close, whispering that Marisol was beneath this family now. That he deserved someone who actually matched the man he'd become. He'd listened. He'd even quietly consulted a divorce attorney about the house, the joint accounts, the assets, fully believing, with his whole chest, that Marisol had nothing worth splitting at all. The rings came out on a wide tray lined in black velvet. Camille bent over them eagerly, fingers hovering, her laughter sharp and bright and entirely careless. She lifted the largest stone on the tray, a diamond that scattered light clean across the ceiling, slid it onto her finger, and held her hand up high to admire it. Now this, she said, turning it slowly to catch every angle of light, is what a real woman deserves. Some women are simply built to wear diamonds. Her eyes drifted lazily across the showroom, until they landed on Marisol by the wall. And some women, she added smiling, are built to hand them over. Eileen laughed and dabbed delicately at the corner of one eye with a gloved finger. But Anton had already moved on to the cruelty he'd apparently been planning the entire time. You know what would be perfect, he said, turning to look directly at his wife. Marisol, come here. She walked over slowly, her footsteps quiet on the marble. He took the velvet box holding the largest stone straight off the tray and pressed it into her hands. Hold this. I want everything perfect when I get down on one knee. Just stand right there and hold it steady. He wanted his own wife to hold the ring meant for his mistress. He wanted her standing a single foot away, forced to witness the proposal firsthand. He wanted to break her publicly, because breaking her quietly at home had apparently stopped being satisfying enough. And here is exactly where the story turns, because Marisol did not break. She took the box. Her hands trembled once, briefly, and then went still. For one unbearable second, she felt the full weight of 4 years pressing down on her all at once. Every swallowed word. Every night she'd cried with the shower running so he wouldn't hear it through the wall. Heat climbed up the back of her throat. Then her thumb found the leather cord at her neck, found the small, bent iron mandrel hidden beneath her collar, and pressed against its cool, familiar metal. Something inside her went very still, very calm. The way the entire sky goes quiet in the seconds right before weather finally turns. She didn't run. She didn't cry. Instead, she began very quietly to move. She walked toward the long glass counter roped off near the back of the store, the section no ordinary customer was ever permitted to approach. She lifted the velvet rope without a moment's hesitation, the way a person lifts the latch on their own front door, and set the coat and garment bag down gently on the spotless glass. A security guard stationed near the entrance saw her do it, and made no move to stop her. He simply lowered his eyes the exact way a man lowers his eyes in front of someone he ultimately answers to. Marisol turned, found the gaze of an older employee polishing a display case nearby, and gave him the smallest possible nod. He set his cloth down immediately and disappeared toward the back office at a brisk walk. Anton noticed none of it. He was busy. Let her hold the bags while we look, he told Camille, pleased with himself. She's good at that. For years of marriage, and it's the one thing she's never once disappointed me at. Eileen gave her sharp little laugh. A customer browsing nearby glanced over, visibly uncomfortable, and quietly drifted toward the far side of the store. But the staff weren't laughing at all. One by one, they'd gone completely still.
The woman arranging necklaces had set them down mid-motion. Priya stood frozen behind her counter, eyes flicking between Marisol and the man insulting her, her jaw tightening as she began to understand exactly whose store this actually was.
And it was not this man's.
The whole showroom had gone strangely, unnaturally quiet, the way a room goes still right before something happens that no one standing in it is prepared for. Everyone could feel the air shifting. Everyone except the one man it was all about to land on. The store manager came hurrying out of the back office almost at a run. His name was Mr. Whitfield, a tall, silver-haired man in a perfectly pressed charcoal suit, straightening his tie as he crossed the floor, his face pale as printer paper. He walked straight past Anton. He walked straight past Camille, who still had a diamond glinting proudly on her finger. He crossed the entire showroom, stopped directly in front of Marisol, and lowered his head. "Miss Duarte," he said, his voice low and thick with genuine respect. "Forgive us. We had no idea you were coming in today. Had we known, we would have opened the private atelier upstairs and cleared this entire floor for you." The silence that followed wasn't the gasping kind.
It was heavier than that.
It was the silence of an entire room quietly running the same impossible math and arriving, every single one of them, at the same answer. Camille's hand drifted slowly down from where she'd been admiring her borrowed ring. Anton laughed, short and nervous. "There's clearly some kind of mistake here. Why are you bowing to her?
She doesn't own anything.
She's carrying my coat. I'd know. I'm her husband. Mr. Whitfield didn't even turn his head. Sir, this is Marisol Duarte, founder of Duarte and Wren, owner of this location and 6 others across 3 states. Every single person under this roof works for her. Anton's smile cracked straight down the middle. He looked around the store, waiting for someone, anyone, to laugh and tell him it was some elaborate joke. Nobody laughed. Not one employee looked even remotely surprised. They'd known the second she walked through those doors. Only Anton, who had shared a bed with her for 4 straight years, had never known her at all. Then Marisol finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it was the kind of soft that fills every corner of a silent room completely. You never asked, she said. In 4 years, Anton, you never once asked me what I actually did when I left the house every morning. I told you a small lie the day we met. A boring one about inventory and paperwork. And you believed it instantly, without blinking, because you'd already decided I wasn't worth a second question. I didn't hide this behind some elaborate scheme. I hid it behind your own arrogance. You built that wall yourself. I simply stood quietly behind it. She set the velvet box gently down on the glass counter, like something she genuinely felt sorry for. I built this, she said. Not borrowed it. Not married into it. Not inherited it from anyone. I sketched my first design on the back of a hardware store receipt at my grandfather's kitchen table, under a light bulb that flickered because we could barely afford to keep the electricity on some months. I sold my first piece for a few dollars at a flea market table on the edge of town. Every case in this room, every stone, every single person wearing this company's name on their name tag, I built every bit of it with these 2 hands. She held them up, and they didn't shake at all anymore. So far, you may have already guessed most of this. The title told you she owned the store, and the moment that manager bowed his head, the secret was essentially out in the open. If the story ended right there, it would still be a satisfying one. But you'd have seen every bit of it coming from the very first minute. So let me tell you what nobody standing in that room saw coming. Not the staff. Not Camille. Not even Anton. Especially not Anton. Marisol turned slowly and looked directly at Eileen. Tell him, she said quietly. Or I will. Eileen's face had gone very still. Whatever satisfaction had been sitting there moments earlier was completely gone now, replaced with something cornered and desperate. I don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about, Eileen said. You do, Marisol answered. You've known for over a year. She turned back to face Anton, her voice staying gentle in a way that somehow made every word land harder. 18 months ago, your mother toured this very building as a guest of a local arts foundation's charity board. She saw my name, my real name, engraved on the founder's plaque in the main lobby. I watched her read it. I watched her understand exactly what she was looking at. And I watched her decide, right there in that lobby, to say absolutely nothing to you about it. Anton turned toward his mother.
Mama.
Is that true? You knew. Eileen lifted her chin defensively. I don't have to stand here and listen to this woman's fabricated stories. Then leave, Marisol said simply. But the plaque is still hanging in my lobby. The visitor sign-in log from that tour still has your signature on it. The foundation still has the event photographs from that afternoon. You're welcome to walk out that door right now, Eileen. But the truth is going to follow you home either way. Or you could stop performing, and we could all finally hear it from your own mouth. Eileen didn't leave. She couldn't. To walk away now would be an admission of guilt. To stay meant standing cornered in front of everyone. So she stood there, trapped between both impossible choices, while her son stared at her and waited for an answer that clearly wasn't coming easily. She figured it out, Marisol went on. A wife worth more than this entire family combined, and a son who could be steered like a small boat in calm water. So she made a plan, and I'll give her this much. She was patient about it. She never told you the truth, Anton, because the truth would have meant you started treating me better. And a husband who treats his wife, well, doesn't give a divorce attorney anything useful to work with. So instead, she started whispering harder. Every dinner, every phone call, filling her head slowly with the idea that I was small, that I was holding you back from the life you actually deserved. She wanted you to grow ashamed of me, and it worked, because some part of you wanted it to work too. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Camille. And then she found you at a fundraiser your mother insisted you attend. Do you remember that evening? She didn't introduce the two of you by accident, Anton. She placed her directly in your path, the way you position a piece deliberately on a board. Someone beautiful, flashy, the complete opposite of the quiet wife waiting at home. Easy to fall for in the moment, and easy later to point toward in a courtroom. Anton's mouth fell open. A courtroom? That was always the plan, Marisol said. Here's how she believed this would unfold. You'd leave me publicly, maybe even humiliate me the way you attempted to do today. You'd file first, so the narrative becomes that I was the cold, secretive wife who deliberately hid a fortune from her devoted, unsuspecting husband. Then the attorneys argue you're owed a substantial share for years of emotional suffering, for the deception, for a marriage I supposedly poisoned with secrets I never told you. She never actually wanted you free, Anton. A free son is genuinely no use to anyone plotting a payout. She wanted you armed with a grievance she could eventually convert into a settlement check. Today, in this store, you weren't choosing a ring for a woman you love. You were the final moving piece in your own mother's 18-month plan, and you didn't even realize you were on the board at all. The entire showroom had gone silent. Camille had gone white as chalk. She looked over at Eileen with the slow, dawning horror of a woman realizing she'd never actually been anyone's girlfriend at all. She'd been a piece on a board the whole time. The fundraiser, Camille said slowly. You approached me first that night. You told me about your son, said he was unhappy, that his marriage was already essentially over, that he just needed someone to remind him what he genuinely deserved. Her voice cracked. You said it like you were doing me a favor. You set me up with him deliberately. You used me to help break a marriage, so you could rob a woman I'd never even met. Her voice dropped nearly to a whisper. You used me, she said again, mostly to herself, as the full shape of it finally landed. Eileen finally spoke, her voice coming out thin and ugly. I was protecting my son's future. No, Marisol said, without raising her voice at all. You were protecting your own comfort. You didn't care who got broken along the way to get it. Your son.
Me.
Even this young woman you treated like a tool to be picked up and discarded the moment she'd served her purpose. For a moment, Marisol genuinely looked sad, and the sadness was somehow worse than any anger could have been. She was never my real enemy in this room, she said, gesturing slightly toward Camille. She was a victim of yours, exactly like I was, and she just didn't know it yet. You were the enemy, Eileen. You sat at my table. You ate meals I paid for without ever knowing it. You smiled in my face for 18 straight months while quietly sharpening a knife behind my back. And you very nearly got away with it. I let this entire scene play out today, this whole ugly moment, because Anton needed to see you clearly with his own two eyes. He would never have believed a single word of it coming from me. He only ever believed you. Anton stood frozen, staring at his mother like he was seeing her for the very first time in his life. Every memory was rearranging itself behind his eyes all at once. Every dinner where she'd quietly picked at his wife. Every late-night phone call assuring him he deserved so much more. Every door she'd carefully opened toward another woman while pretending it was coincidence. It hadn't been maternal love guiding any of it. It had been a hunter's patience. What happened next didn't happen with any shouting at all. The truly powerful rarely ever need to raise their voice. The legal case Eileen had spent 18 months quietly constructing had nothing left to grab onto because the company had been legally walled off under Marisol's maiden name through a private holding structure years before the marriage ever began. There was no shared fortune sitting there waiting to be split. There never had been. Eileen had schemed her own family apart for a prize that had never once actually been on the table. Camille picked up her coat. She didn't look at Anton at all. She looked only at Eileen, and what she said was meant for her alone. You're worse than both of us combined. Then she walked out, and the doors hushed closed behind her, and she never came back. Eileen reached for her son's arm. Anton, baby, listen to me. We can still. He pulled away slowly, the way a man pulls his hand back from a fire he hadn't realized was actually burning him. He didn't yell. He simply stepped back out of her reach and couldn't quite bring himself to look at her directly. For Eileen, that small step backward was the loudest sound in the entire room. She had spent her whole life holding her son tightly, and in trying to use him as a tool, she had lost him completely. Marisol gave a quiet nod to the security guard, who stepped forward and walked Eileen calmly toward the exit. She left alone. No fur coat could keep her warm against what she'd just lost. That left Anton standing alone in the middle of the floor of the very store his wife owned outright, with nothing left in his hands and nothing standing behind him. He turned to Marisol. "I have nothing now," he said, his voice completely hollow. "No house, it was always yours. No money, also yours. No mother I can stand to even look at right now. You should feel like you've won. So finish it. Throw me out too." And here is where Marisol did the one thing absolutely nobody in that room expected. She didn't throw him out. She studied him for a long, quiet moment. This man who had humiliated her in front of strangers, this man she had once chosen, years earlier, in a small courthouse ceremony in a borrowed dress. Then she said something very softly. "When I was 19, she told him, "I had nothing at all. No money, no family fortune waiting behind me, just an old iron ring mandrel and some sketches, and far too much pride. A stranger at a flea market gave me half of her folding table to sell my pieces from.
She didn't owe me a single thing.
But she told me once that everybody deserves one honest place to start. That table is the entire reason I'm standing in this room today." She reached into her bag, pulled out a plain business card, and set it down gently on the glass in front of him. It wasn't a check. It wasn't divorce paperwork. It was a simple card with an address and a name. "That's my metalworking warehouse on the industrial side of town," she said. "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., the loading floor. The lowest position we have, sweeping, lifting, learning the raw materials from the very ground up. No name recognition, no favors extended. Nobody there will ever know you were once married to me. You start exactly where I started, with absolutely nothing but your own 2 hands. If you show up, you work. If you don't, you'll never hear from me again. That choice belongs entirely to you now." Anton stared down at the card, then picked it up with 2 fingers like it might scald him. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I did today, after everything before today, why would you possibly do this for me?" "Because throwing you out only proves your mother right," Marisol said. "That this was ever about money or revenge. It wasn't. This was about a man who lived 4 years beside me and never once thought I was worth truly knowing. I can't make you worth knowing, Anton. That isn't a gift anybody can hand another person. You have to build it the exact same way I had to build everything else in my life. But I can offer you the one thing nobody ever handed me for free. An honest place to begin. What you make from there belongs entirely to you."
She paused.
"And maybe, for the very first time in your whole life, it will actually be yours. Not your mother's. Not mine. Not borrowed and not stolen. Yours." She picked up her coat, the same one he'd made her carry into the store like hired help. "Understand something clearly," she said. "This isn't because you've earned it. You haven't. Part of me genuinely wanted to watch that guard walk you out the same way he walked your mother out. But I've spent my whole life around people who were handed real power and used it to crush whoever happened to be standing beneath them. Your mother is exactly one of those people. The day I use my power the same way is the day I become her. I refuse to become her. Not for you. Not for anyone." She held his gaze steadily. "So that card doesn't expire. The job itself is real. 6 a.m. means 6 a.m., and nobody there will hold your hand through it. But I won't ask you twice, and I will never come looking for you. The next move is the first honest one you'll ever make entirely on your own. Make it or don't. That part was never mine to decide for you." She turned away from him and walked toward the counter, where Priya still stood trembling, her whole expression softening completely. "You did nothing wrong today," Marisol told the young woman. "You were kind to me before you had any idea who I was. That is the only thing in this entire room that ever genuinely mattered. Most people only treat you well after they learn what you're worth. The rare ones are kind before they know anything at all. Hold on to people like that." She paused, and a small smile touched her mouth. "Come find me Monday morning. I think you're wasted standing behind that counter." The doors hushed closed. The store settled back into quiet. And on the glass counter, a single plain business card sat exactly where a man now had to decide what kind of person he was actually going to become. Time passed the way it always does, quietly, without ever asking anyone's permission. Marisol didn't throw herself a celebration. She didn't post a single word about any of it. She simply went back to work, the way her grandfather had returned to his workshop every single morning of his hard, honest life. You'd find her most mornings not in some corner office, not seated at the head of a boardroom table, but in a small workshop tucked behind the flagship store, sleeves rolled past her elbows, her hands shaping metal the way her grandfather once shaped iron. And on the table beside her, exactly where she could always see it, sat that same worn, tarnished ring mandrel. She pulled Priya out from behind the sales counter and began teaching her the craft, piece by piece, patiently, the way nobody had ever formally taught Marisol herself. One quiet afternoon, Priya finally asked her why. Marisol drew the mandrel out from beneath her collar and let it rest in her open palm. "Somebody once told me to build something they couldn't take from me," she said. "And I did. But the thing they truly can't take away isn't a building or a bank balance. Those things can always be lost. It's what you pass along to somebody else afterward. So I'm giving you what I have because that's the only part of any of this that actually lasts." Priya smiled and bent back over her work, and the only sound left in the room was the soft, steady tap of metal, two sets of hands working carefully side by side. As for Eileen, her social calendar grew quiet, then stopped altogether. The invitations simply stopped arriving. She had traded her only son for a fortune that had never truly existed, and in the end, she was left holding neither. Camille never resurfaced, and Marisol never spent a single hour of her life thinking about either of them again. Bitterness is a tax the wounded keep paying to the people who hurt them, long after those people are already gone, and she had decided a long time ago never to pay it. And Anton. On a cold morning several weeks later, at exactly 6 a.m., a man showed up at a warehouse on the industrial edge of town. Nobody there knew a single thing about his past. He gave only a first name and nothing more. They handed him a broom, pointed him toward the loading floor, and he took it without complaint.
He swept.
He lifted whatever he was told to lift. He learned the names of medals he'd worn casually on his wrists for years without ever once wondering where any of it actually came from. The work was hard and plain, and it humbled him in ways that 4 years of comfortable living never had managed to. His hands blistered. His back ached constantly. At lunch he sat alone at first, because he genuinely didn't know how to talk to people who couldn't do anything to advance him. But he came back the next day and the day after that. A young floor supervisor, with no idea who he'd once been, told him one evening that he was slow, but that he showed up consistently, and that showing up was most of the battle. Anton didn't answer. He simply nodded, went home to a single rented room, and set his alarm for 5 the next morning. Whether he would eventually become someone genuinely different, or whether his old pride would grow too heavy to carry and he'd quietly disappear from that loading floor for good, even Marisol didn't know the answer to that.
She didn't check in on him.
She had meant every word she'd said. The next chapter of his life finally belonged entirely to him. To write, with no one left whispering in his ear to steer the pen. But she had given him the exact same thing a stranger had once given her at a flea market table. Not money. Not forgiveness handed over freely. A door, and the full dignity of having to walk through it entirely on his own strength. One quiet evening, when the workshop lights were low and the day's work was finished, Marisol reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple ring, not a diamond, not the largest stone in any display case, just a plain band she'd shaped herself years earlier, at the very beginning, worth almost nothing to anyone who measured value only in dollars. She slid it onto her own finger and smiled, because the people who had spent so long measuring her worth by what she carried in her arms had never once actually seen what she was truly holding in her hands the entire time. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight. We tend to assume betrayal always comes from the obvious direction: the mistress, the outsider, the stranger circling from the edges. But so often the deepest cut comes from someone who smiles warmly at your dinner table and calls themselves family. Marisol lost a husband and a marriage that day inside that jewelry house. But what nearly destroyed her wasn't the woman in the burgundy dress. It was the quiet architect in the fur coat, the one everyone in that family had trusted completely. And even holding every ounce of power in that room, Marisol still refused to become her. That's the part worth carrying home with you tonight. When she finally held all the leverage in that room, she didn't use it to destroy a broken man. She used it to offer him one honest place to begin again, the exact same gift a stranger once gave a poor girl with an iron mandrel and a stubborn dream. The loudest people in that showroom walked away having lost absolutely everything. The quiet one walked out with her dignity, her company, and her soul fully intact, because real strength was never about getting even. Anyone can get even. It only takes anger and an opportunity. Real strength is holding every bit of power in your two hands and choosing, deliberately, not to crush the person who spent years trying to crush you. That is the rarest thing in this entire world, and it was the one outcome none of them ever saw coming, because it was the one thing not a single one of them could have ever done themselves. If this story moved you tonight, do me one small favor. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and give me one single word for how Marisol made you feel. I read every single one. Then hit that subscribe button, because I've got so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Stories about the quiet people the world underestimated, and the unforgettable day everyone around them finally learned exactly who they really were. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care of yourself out there, and never let anyone in this life convince you that quiet means small.